Hello, everybody that's joining us here today for a special presentation by Carbon Leadership Forum of Chicago, the Chicago Hub, and our incredible introduction to SE2050 and how structural engineers from across the country are implementing embodied carbon strategies into their core values and their firm's DNA. I am David Swain with Studio Gang in Chicago, and the other Chicago Hub leaders are Mohammed Abbasi, Juanita Garcia, Emily Purcell, and Jill Maltby Abbott. And today we're being joined by the chair, Michael Gryniuk of SE2050, along with major structural design firms across the country, represented by Thornton Tomasetti, Patrick Kenny and Michael Cropper from Thornton Tomasetti, Janet Ramp and Shanna Kelly from KPFF, Catherine Kai and Tim Lewis from MKA, Matthew Streeter and Chris Horiuchi from SOM, and Teresa Vangeli from WSP. And after they do a little intro about their particular firms and what they're doing to implement SE2050, we'll have a little panel moderated by Mohammed Abbasi and Alex Stern from WSP. So with all that said, I'm going to hand it off to Michael Gryniuk, and he's going to do a little introduction about what SE2050 is and the future of embodied carbon as we move to net zero carbon in 2050, we hope. Thanks a lot, and Mike, I'll hand it off to you. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I hope I don't have to give the whole future of embodied carbon in this 15-minute presentation, but I'll do my best on the structural side of things. Yeah, thank you for that introduction. As David mentioned, my name is Mike Gryniuk, and I'm a principal and practicing structural engineer at LeMessurier, and I'm also proudly serving as the first chair of the SE2050 commitment program. I'm very excited to be here just to give you a brief overview of the program, but really even more excited to set it up for this amazing group of structural engineers whose firms have all made the commitment and become an SE2050 signatory. Frankly, these are not only firms making impressive strides in the measuring and mitigating of embodied carbon on their projects, but they're also providing us valuable feedback on what is and what is not working to help shape the future of the program. And I think we'll get into that with the Q&A session. And speaking of committed firms, I am extremely proud to say that we have, as of this morning, 71 firms committed. Having been, and that's really only in about just over a year, right? A year and a few months. And having been involved with the program since the end of 2017, I believe, this is very exciting to see how many firms we've been able to get in such a short period of time. Frankly, when we were having these conversations several years ago, I think we would have been happy with 20 firms. But given just how much fantastic work has been done with embodied carbon, the Carbon Leadership Forum, frankly, spearheading that effort, it really isn't that much of a surprise here. So much so, we're going to get greedy here and set our 2022 goal of getting 200 firms committed by the end of this year, which is very ambitious, but we think with your help, we can certainly get there. Briefly, I'd say our mission is ultimately as a community of structural designers to achieve net zero embodied carbon by 2050. But more specifically, as a program, our mission is really a response by the Structural Engineering Institute of ASCE to support the SE2050 challenge that was issued by the CLF in the summer of 2019. That SE2050 challenge states all structural engineers shall understand, reduce, and ultimately limit embodied carbon in their projects by 2050. Now, given the timing that we have for this presentation, I'm skipping over about 7 to 8 years of history of other firms, some firms on this call that worked on the initial stages of getting us to this point. But in summer 2019, that challenge was issued, and then just a few months later, SEI formally endorsed the SE2050 challenge in December, and really at that point committed to developing the SE2050 commitment program. This is a chart that we put together in 2018, just talking about history, and it's still accurate. The concept is pretty straightforward. It parallels the AIA 2030 commitment on the operational side, but for us, of course, it's embodied carbon. So it's the same concept of tracking energy, having firms submit information on the predicted energy use of their projects, and then establishing benchmarks and targets for reduction. Of course, here we understand that there are several paths to achieving net zero embodied carbon, and really we're going to need all of them, that being building reuse, not building the building in the first place, finding ways to specify materials that are a little bit more efficient on the embodied carbon side. Of course, there are some design efficiencies we can work on. And then I think it's fairly safe to say that we're going to have to rely on other industries to improve the processes of their product manufacturing to ultimately get to net zero. Should be easy, right? So these are some of the questions and comments and feedback we got as we were in the early planning stages, and frankly, some of the comments that we still get today. A few of these I really enjoy. My favorite one is, of course, the confused look that I received multiple times, usually followed up with a question of, you want to do what? And then ultimately, you know, how much is this going to cost? Is this going to affect my schedule? What is embodied carbon? Can't we just put more fly ash in the concrete mix? Do these embodied carbon numbers look right? Is it even possible to get to zero? And so on and so forth. So over several years, even before the challenge was issued, we pulled together many groups of different stakeholders, held in-person meetings and countless virtual meetings to try and find ways to address these comments. I mean, ultimately, we understood some of this would be solved through collective efforts of the building industry as a whole, but other aspects we felt like we could offer a leading voice as the structural engineering organization in the United States. And ultimately, the fact that we are creating a community of structural designers will, we believe, in itself instigate positive change. Just having this meeting is a perfect example of that. So when we set out to develop the program, and again, using some of the AIA 2030 as a precedent, we really wanted to make sure that the program would make real change. We wanted to ensure that it was a collaborative environment, and it required firm engagement. And to assist with the professional cultural shift that we believe is really required within the engineering community, is why we made this program only available to firms. Individual structural engineers cannot join. The entire program is founded on the principles of education, advocacy, and accountability. Logistically, for firms, this means establishing an embodied carbon action plan, implementing that plan, and then sharing that information and their experiences with the profession. This includes sharing of the embodied carbon data of real projects, all done on an annual basis. And of course, we can get into that a little bit further, and probably in the Q&A session, we'll touch on some of those challenges. Our hope is that this creates a positive feedback loop that ultimately contributes to a larger goal of net zero embodied carbon structures by 2050. To complement the firm's commitments, we do, as an organization, commit to fostering a collaborative environment and the necessary resources and support where possible to achieve those goals. Briefly, I just want to mention, logistically, the program is run by a dedicated and frankly enthusiastic group of volunteers who are members of the SE2050 subcommittee. That subcommittee is a subcommittee to the SEI Sustainability Committee. We have no paid staff dedicated to this program. SEI staff does provide some support, including legal and communications assistance. But ultimately, the 6 subgroups manage the various aspects of the program, and each one of these subgroups has a volunteer lead. Okay, so here's how it works if you're not familiar. Firms initiate their commitment by submitting a letter to the SEI SE2050 website. what's really important is the letter must come from firm leadership in order, in our opinion, to have an effective movement. We don't want leadership to be silent on this issue, and having the letter come from leadership, it sort of is a nice way to disseminate that signal down throughout the office. Within a 6-month period of time of signing the letter, firms must submit an embodied carbon action plan, and we'll get into that in a second. And then within 12 months, firms must contribute project data to the SE2050 database. The ECAP and data are annual commitments. So there's a constant process of planning, reporting, assessing where we're at, where the firm is at, making adjustments to the program, and sort of keep finding the best practices to get to net zero by 2050. So this is sort of that positive feedback loop we're trying to create. A central component of that is of course the ECAP, or the Embodied Carbon Action Plan, which has 4 building blocks: education, reporting, reduction, and advocacy. Each block has a minimum number of requirements, and we'll briefly touch on those in a minute. All of those requirements are in great detail in our embodied carbon guidance, or excuse me, our ECAP guidance document found on our website here. I know you can't read that page, but trust me, just click that link and you'll get the program requirements. But briefly, I'll say education is really the first step to increase the engagement within your firm. So we are requiring firms to designate a firm-wide embodied carbon champion, put together a narrative of what the firm's education plan is to educate their staff, and commit to presenting an embodied carbon 101 presentation to the firm within the first year, and putting this all in writing. Reporting. So obviously quality data, and we will definitely get into this later, is essential to making any sort of informed decisions and developing appropriate embodied carbon reduction targets. We set a relatively low bar of entry to get more firms to commit early on in the program. And so we are only requiring 2 times the number of firm offices. So if you have 1 office, that's 2 projects a year. And if you have multiple offices, no more than 5 projects a year. In the future, we do plan to increase that number. The requirement here on a reduction strategies is that, and this is where sharing and sort of helping the greater movement, take tremendous advantage of all of our efforts by sharing the information. So we'd like firms to set internal goals and then report back on that progress, what worked, what didn't work. I don't know about you, but I personally tend to learn a lot more from hearing what hasn't worked than really just seeing these really nice diagrams and sort of the best thing that happened on individual projects. I think we've all found that we do a lot better course correcting when adjusting for some things that didn't necessarily work out. And then advocacy is really important to share that information. So we're asking people to share that you signed up to this commitment, educate your clients, engage in groups like this one, like the CLF, giving presentations and talking to different people that are part of these organizations to, again, just keep spreading the word, just keep moving forward. Now, the accountability. So what we didn't want to have happen is people say, well, we signed on a commitment, we created this embodied carbon action plan, we're done. We sort of made our contribution. So I can say that the subgroup that is responsible for collecting these embodied carbon action plans has been very good at sending 3-month reminders, 6-month reminders, 9-month reminders, and 1-year reminders to make sure that these firms submit their ECAPs. And we have made it all public. So you can go right onto the website here, and you can look at every one of these firms' embodied carbon plans, when they're supposed to be issuing a new one, or an updated one, I should say, and then when their next round of data to the database is due. So all very, very public. Of course, how to start, right? So I can say that this can be a daunting task. One thing that I will tell you, you can go to the website and you'll see some very, very nicely done ECAPs, but we've also made it possible to just fill out a Google form so that you don't have to go through the rigmarole of really, spending a lot of time on a really nice looking document, which, we would love you to, but if you can't, the option is to submit through the Google form on the website. I'm going to briefly talk about our database. There's a lot. I mean, we could give multiple presentations on this, but I'd like to just give a quick overview and then get into the Q&A session with the panel. So I don't think it's any secret why we might want a database. I'll say that green rating systems schemes nowadays really require you to establish a so-called baseline building and make substantive reductions from that baseline of what would be normally designed or built, and compare it to the new project and show some sort of reduction, which is fantastic. Okay, there's no question about it. But the reality is, if we have to get to net zero by 2050, which we all recognize, and frankly, maybe even before 2050, sort of reduced embodied carbon from a baseline may actually put you well above the curve. Now, this is a little bit of a can of worms. We understand that there are all sorts of project constraints and requirements and reasons why one building might have more embodied carbon than the next. But putting that all to the side, it is still important to see where your building lands with respect to the targets. Now, let's say you were in 2020 below that line. That does feel good, but what if you employed the same strategies 10 years later? You would actually be sort of above the target. Okay, so that's really the general concept of why we need some sort of database to allow us to ensure that we're sort of heading in the right direction. There have been plenty of, I shouldn't say plenty, there have been other beta database precedents put out there, and some of them good. A lot of them, frankly, at this point, identified ways to improve, and so we're trying to leverage the work that they did previously, and try to sort of come up with a more structural focused database that makes sense to a structural engineer, isn't overly complicated, and is accessible to the profession. So our priorities, okay, knowing that this was our first go at it, was to just familiarize structural firms with embodied carbon reporting, right? So we can't, we sort of have to take baby steps in the beginning here, and we're only asking people to submit global warming potential results at a minimum. Of course, we would eventually like to also collect structural material quantities, but for now, it's just global warming potential. And we're really hoping to highlight trends and the visibility of why we need to continue to track and collect even more data to establish those trends and benchmarks in the future. There's a lot that you can find on our website in terms of what we're collecting, but really here, our focus was to try to collect what sort of made sense to a structural engineer. And of course, we'll be tweaking this as we get feedback from firms. I'm not going to read each one of these, but some pretty basic structural information, as well as the LCA data. And then that is basically converted into a embodied carbon intensity. So here is a screenshot of what our first pass of the dashboard looked like here. Generally, you have a dashboard that includes all of the embodied carbon of the publicly available projects. There are different user types. So you have firm user, you have super admin, you have firm admin, so on and so forth. It's a pretty standard dashboard. And getting into specific projects, you can go back, you can import projects using an import spreadsheet. You can export projects, you have a project list, you can edit or delete a project, so on and so forth. So we're pretty excited about this. This was launched only a few months ago, and here is the current snapshot of data that we've collected. I think we have 70 projects in about in 2 months. So we have 70 projects in 2 months. So we're doing, I think, pretty well. Obviously, we want to increase that. But you can hear, we have done no analysis, but this is the scatter of the initial projects received. And so we're not going to make any decisions or set any sort of benchmarks or trends based on this just yet, but I just thought it was pretty cool to show that only after 2 months we have several projects in the database. Basically, this is the diagram just to show you and demonstrate to you that we are trying to talk to as many stakeholders as possible and really talking to the industry. We're really not trying to be off in the corner, sort of doing our own thing and ignoring what else is going on. I mean, we all know that there's quite a bit going on in embodied carbon. So, the concept is that the structural firm submits the global warming potential into our database. Those embodied carbon intensities are then reviewed and discussed with an industry roundtable. Perhaps a third party group is assessing the data. Those targets or trends and benchmarks are put back into the database, and then the structural firm can review their performance relative to that information. In the future, we very much want to and plan to include structural material quantities for several reasons. I mean, structural material quantities is something that structural engineers care a whole lot about. It also allows us to sort of back check the embodied carbon numbers if they make sense. We think this will also help reduce the variability. And so there's a lot of work and a lot of things that we'd like to do in the future, hopefully in the next year or two. And then again, the concept too would be if we had the SMQs from the database, those could be exported to any LCA tool that's commercially available, and then GWP numbers could be produced directly instead of having the structural firm produce the global warming potential. We could just collect SMQs and then run it through any tool that we want while still getting industry feedback. So I'm going to wrap it there. And if we have time, I'll get into additional resources that we have at SE2050. But for now, I'll just leave it with, here are the 71 firms committed, 70 projects submitted to the database, and at least 41, I think that number is higher now, of ECAPs received. So pretty exciting stuff. And I'm very, very much looking forward to hearing from this impressive group of structural engineers. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and hand it off to Patrick Kenny and Michael Cropper of Thornton Tomasetti.
Thank you, Michael. Can everyone, hopefully everyone can see my screen. My name is Michael Cropper. I'm a senior associate structural engineer with Thornton Tomasetti in our Washington, D.C. office. And we've got just a couple of slides to go through about our approach at Thornton Tomasetti with embodied carbon. I've been with TT about 15 years. As a firm, we've been collecting embodied carbon data on our own projects for over 10 years. And some of that data is on the screen. Admittedly, it was a lonely experience for those who were collecting that data a number of years ago, because embodied carbon didn't even have the traction that it does today in industry. So me as a structural engineer, embodied carbon's been new in the last 3 or 4 years. So this effort among the entire industry, and especially among us structural engineers, is new and fresh, and everybody's excited about it, which is great. A couple years ago, as Michael mentioned, we were part of the team that sort of co-initiated the SE2050 challenge, which has been adopted by SEI to become the 2050 commitment, which we're all working toward. What our current focus on at Thornton Tomasetti related to SE2050 is we submitted our ECAP, our embodied carbon action plan, last year. So we've been working toward those goals. We see that as really the roadmap for us in the near term, and then refreshing that every year or every 6 months per the schedule. But it's a great way for us to manage our efforts and guide us in what we do. And Michael mentioned the sort of 4 buckets, the 4 categories of our efforts, and it's education, reporting, the reduction strategies, and advocacy. And for us, we really see 2022 as education and advocacy. So internally, to educate our staff, we've got 1,500 engineers in a variety of disciplines. We've got to educate our staff, get people working toward this, and then educating clients, other stakeholders, and advocating for policy and advocating for incorporation of reduction strategies in our projects. So that's really our focus right now. And I'll turn it over to Patrick Kenny to talk a little bit more now.
Yeah, just to jump into a few brief specifics about kind of how TT is trying to tackle this problem. So we have these things at TT called communities of practice, and it's just small groups within the firm that have a common interest, say timber design or something, and they get together and work on tools for the firm or developing their knowledge. So we started a community of practice for embodied carbon to do the same thing. So we take the most interested people from around the firm, people like me and Michael, and we work together to develop our spec language or programs for educating our staff or share ways that we're doing reductions on our projects. TT also developed a tool called Beacon that, by the way, is publicly available and free to download. It's a plugin for Revit, specifically geared towards structural engineers to calculate embodied carbon on their projects. It's really easy to use, and it's a great kind of intro to, I've got a Revit model. It's the first time I've ever tried doing a takeoff. Try out Beacon, a very easy landing spot for structural engineers. And then to give examples of the two markets that Michael and I work in. So like Michael said, he's in the DC market. So DC is a very concrete heavy town. So they're focused on either can we replace concrete with mass timber, which we're doing some work on, or more importantly, probably because we use a ton of concrete, is how do we make our mixes better? Our concrete mixes lower embodied carbon, and Michael's been doing a lot of great work with local suppliers to try to do that on some projects. Boston, on the other hand, so I'm in the Boston office. We're more of a steel town. So we also, obviously, concrete is big. We do the same thing. We work with local suppliers, but we're also looking more specifically into structural efficiencies to reduce embodied carbon, or the interactions between steel and concrete. So how do we tune our composite floor systems between steel, concrete, different strengths of concrete or types of steel to kind of tune our designs for embodied carbon. That's just a kind of brief overview of what we're doing. Very happy to be here, by the way. This is like my favorite thing in structural engineering in my career, probably has been being able to all of a sudden have really great interaction with a bunch of different firms in ways that that hasn't happened on any other issue. So happy to be here.
I think we're teaming up KPFF now, Janet and Shanna.
Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Janet Ramp from the St. Louis office of KPFF, and I'm joined with Shana Kelly from our Seattle office. And we're going to talk about how SE2050 has been incorporated into our firm. Shana will start off talking about how we got here.
Yeah, thanks, Janet. So when KPFF had signed on to the SE2050 challenge a number of years ago, but when the SE2050 commitment came up, that's really, it's about sort of committing to something and putting down on paper sort of what you're committing to do. And so, we had the option to go in and sign the letter and say we were going to do it. But what we really wanted to do, and how Mike sort of mentioned, we really wanted to bring along everybody in our office with us, including all of the leadership. And so we actually went through and we developed our ECAP sort of before we even signed that letter. And that ended up being this sort of multiple page thing of, detailing out everything that we were planning to do. But really for that to be ingested by everybody, would have been difficult. So what we found was really helpful was to put together a frequently asked questions thing to sort of take around to all the different leaderships and all the different offices to really answer their basic questions, which were, why is this important? And, what do we as structural engineers, what can we do about it? And what are we sort of promising to do as part of joining this commitment? And so it was kind of a long process, but I think it was really worthwhile because it made us really engage with sort of all the different offices and make sure that we were all on board to sort of do this big thing of incorporating new things in with our practice to be part of this commitment. And now Janet's going to talk about sort of what we're doing.
So we held our first annual Structural Sustainability Summit last year, and it was attended by sustainability representatives from all different offices. Quite a few of those representatives actually came back to their local office and gave another sustainability presentation just to their office to continue the education. We've set up a Teams channel with over 70 members across our offices, and this is really a terrific resource for kind of the day-to-day. It allows our regional offices to share their experiences, ask questions to your colleagues and other people in your firm, and ultimately bring those ideas and the successes to your projects and your clients in your market. There's a Q&A section, resource files, shared templates for specifications, latest seminars and past presentations to, again, just make it really easy for the regional offices to be able to share the knowledge that we've started to collect. So we've been talking about some of these strategies. So what have we found that's successful? Expanding or upgrading existing buildings to utilize the embodied carbon that we've already spent and to lengthen the life of the building is a great way to reduce the carbon for new construction. Factoring embodied carbon into system selection criteria early on is really important as well. And this is where our colleagues in the architectural firms can help bring this up in the early system selection. Focus on high intensity embodied carbon materials, concrete, steel, reinforcing, masonry. And if you're not even able to set limits, at least ask for EPDs so you're better prepared next time. We've often seen that even by asking for EPDs, we get a lower embodied carbon material, especially in concrete. And it also shows the concrete subs that we're really serious about this and we're committed to asking for this sustainability data. Sometimes it helps to convert the CO2 into equivalents that our clients and our owners can really understand better. How many gallons of gas, how much can you heat a home for this amount of embodied carbon? So we're engineers, we like quantifying the impacts. At KPFF, we use Tally for life cycle analysis and EC3 for carbon and global warming potential tracking. We have an EC3 account that allows members across the firm, across the country, to explore the shared buildings and also easily go in and create their own project. And we're currently in the process of creating our own firm-wide database for tracking embodied carbon in our projects. We also want to make sure we're pushing the envelope and exploring new technologies. We can share ideas on the latest advancements in carbon reduction with our project teams and help explain what code and structural impacts there may be. As structural engineers, we're not often the ones who come up with these new ideas, but we certainly can help implement that into our projects. We try to find areas in the projects that are responsible areas to experiment with the latest technologies. If we don't know how something is going to behave or where, we want to make sure it's not in a highly exposed, visible area. This is, again, something where our architectural partners can help us come up with areas that may be a spot that we can go and kind of play and experiment with these new technologies. We want to explore unique systems that might be able to reduce quantities in the structure. For instance, could a hybrid system allow you to do more reductions in structural quantities? There's a picture there of some hybrid CLT testing that we did at the University of Washington, where the CLT acts compositely with the concrete. So bringing it back to the Midwest, where sustainability may not be on the forefront of every owner's mind, structural engineers can initiate the sustainability conversation with the design team. This, I think, may be one of the best things to come out of SE2050, besides all this glorious data, is really pushing the structural engineers to be the ones to advocate for sustainability. In St. Louis, where I work, we do several renovations and vertical expansions to existing buildings. We try to work with local material subs to creatively decrease the cement and concrete and get a lower embodied carbon material. And we're continuing to ask for EPDs, like I said, that may actually end up giving us a lower embodied carbon material anyway, and also push our owners to look at different material types. All right, I am going to hand it off to MKA.
Great, thanks, Janet. Hi, everyone. My name is Catherine Kai. I am a structural engineer with MKA out of Seattle, Washington. And we at MKA have been really passionate about sustainability and reducing our carbon footprint in the built environment. We've been active in this space for over a decade. So with that, my colleague Tim and I will dive right into what sustainability and our commitment to SE 2050 look like at MKA.
Hey everyone, my name is Tim Lewis. Like Catherine said, we're at MKA and excited to join you guys today. So we'll jump straight into it. One of the big things that we talk about a lot at MKA is our project quantities. So we see this as something that's folded in regularly to our practice, right? I mean, we're all structural engineers at MKA, and keeping track of what material we're actually assigning into this building is our responsibility, and we like to kind of up our practice around tracking those project quantities. And where embodied carbon comes in is when we're better at tracking those project quantities, we can take a pretty short journey to have embodied carbon data coming from those project quantities. Initiatives like SE 2050 and Carbon Leadership Forum, there's a lot of great resources to help you transform your quantities into carbon numbers. And so we've been trying to put those pieces of information into the hands of our engineers and installing them onto our regularly used standardized office tools so that it becomes sort of folded into our practice. One thing else we get asked a lot about, or something we do quite a bit for our clients, has to do with embodied carbon case studies. And so what we're showing here is the same building considered 3 different ways with 3 different materials. And the black dots are representing what we think the global warming potential would be for each of those schemes. We also measure some uncertainty. You can see there's kind of up and down bars there. And, in this case, the timber comes out a little bit ahead, but it's not necessarily the case that timber would always do that. There's a lot of variability in materials, and the point here being that we want to build mechanisms and tools and put these choices into the hands of our engineers so that we can make informed choices with our client, and basically giving them options, different systems to consider. And every building's different. This is an office building and timber works well for it, but a stadium or an arena or a high rise, all are going to have different answers. And so it's important to us to have the right tools in place that have the right embodied carbon numbers so that we can consider these alternatives. And so building these tools out has been a huge effort that we've undertaken at MKA, and it's yielded some really great results where we can pretty quickly come up with these types of pieces of information to make good decisions in our projects.
So compiling the data is the first step and fairly straightforward. Essentially, quantities times GWP equals embodied carbon, but data is only useful if it's quality data, and that's the challenging part of the puzzle. SE 2050 has done a really great job of starting to create a database that spans different regions, different firms, project types, but it's important that the data being compared in the database are apples to apples. Within whole building life cycle analyses, for example, there's a lot of uncertainty and speculation. There's the number in the database doesn't necessarily paint the full picture of a project. For example, are we all considering the same lifespan of a project? Some quantities might just quantify the product stage A1 through A3, while others consider the entire end of life and replacement of systems on a different design life. So we look forward to partnering with SE 2050 and other structural engineering firms to come up with standards and a sort of a basis of analysis. And we're excited for this two-way street with SE 2050. Within MKA, we've seen a lot of potential over or through managing a project like a budget, treating carbon like money. So in this graph, you can see moving left to right through different project phases, we have seen opportunities to implement design reduction strategies throughout the design stage, and then even going into supplier selection and vendor selection. Overall, we've seen a reduction from our baseline simply by talking and asking about sustainability within a project. We've also found that just by asking the questions that were previously not asked and then acting on the data, we can actually drive down building carbon footprints in some pretty remarkable ways. Here in Seattle, looking at just one type of concrete, this 5,000 PSI ready mix, this data is pulled from the EC3 database, and we've seen that just over the last couple of years, simply by focusing on APDs at the time of bidding and asking for data from our suppliers, we've seen a decrease in our carbon footprint, which is pretty encouraging.
So we also wanted to highlight some of these broader places that we like to participate, and these are just a few of the spaces and organizations that are on this topic. And I'm sure wherever you are in the country, there's probably a local organization that you can also plug into. Here in Seattle, we're very close with the Building Transparency Group. We're very close with this Carbon Leadership Forum. And we've also at MKA decided to start this MKA Foundation, in which we are investing, not just time and effort, but also proper money to fund embodied carbon research and try to make technical advancements and look at hybrid structures, a lot like what the KPFF team was discussing. And I think collectively, it's fun to look at all this happening across the industry and feel like we're each sort of pushing, for these unique solutions and trying to get a lower carbon answer so that we can all sort of share the results and kind of drive that result together. And with that, I think this SE2050 is a wonderful space to do it in. I think putting all of our heads together and sharing what works, what didn't, here's how we measure things, what's our baseline, those conversations are all super productive. And we also look at this as something that's very integral to our practice. It's a space where structural engineers can lead because we understand the quantities in our buildings, and the better we understand those quantities, the better we can, it's basically a better result for the project. We're building with less material. We can sort of drive this whole conversation towards the carbon neutral buildings. And so we look forward to anybody who wants to join this SE2050 group with us, and looking forward to putting our heads together. So we'll hand it over to the next team.
Yeah, thanks, Tim and Catherine. I'm Chris Horiuchi from the San Francisco office of SOM, joined by my colleague Matt, who's going to start us off here.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. Matt Streeter, I'm in the New York office, structural associate at SOM. So I think if you go to the next slide, Chris, we wanted to keep it pretty short and sweet and just go over some of the current focus areas that we have kind of in our sustainability group. So as part of our sustainable design practice, we've been trying to focus our energy on these three primary areas that you see. The first being, our commitment to carbon reporting and reduction from both an embodied carbon standpoint, but also from an operational carbon standpoint. So you can see, for SE2050, this will be our first year reporting. We're pretty excited about that. And, as others have said, we found that the development of the ECAP, our Embodied Carbon Action Plan, to be a really great exercise to kind of focus ourselves and get everything aligned in those four primary categories. And then last year was our first time reporting structural embodied carbon for AIA 2030. They've started to ask for that stuff. So we've been trying to provide support as much as we can for our architectural teams to get as much data into these commitment programs as possible, so they can start to develop these trends, develop these benchmarks, and we can identify what's successful and what needs improvement from a design standpoint on all of our projects. And I think one of the big things that SOM is trying to strive for, being an integrated A&E practice, we'd like to leverage that as much as possible to perform an integrated design and use that to find reductions in efficiencies from both the operational carbon standpoint and the embodied carbon standpoint, so we can drive forward, as a group together to kind of meet our commitments as an industry. The second big focus is obviously on calculations. We're working to develop workflows for calculating embodied carbon on all of our projects. Our aim in this one is to make it, as integral part of our design process as possible throughout every phase and across all disciplines. The goal being to monitor, the carbon health of a project throughout its development, so that we can see moments where we're, maybe not meeting our targets, or if we're doing better on our targets, why are we doing better on those targets? And we can hopefully apply that to other projects. So you can see the list of tools there. One of the big aspects of this effort has been, I think, education, educating ourselves as to what tools are available in the market for calculating embodied carbon, how do those integrate with our modeling softwares and our current workflows, and finding the best tool that fits for each project and each phase. So, that's something that is a big part of our effort right now. I think others have said it, that we're really right now trying to increase our own knowledge and our education on these aspects of calculating embodied carbon and reporting them. And then the third area of focus is in our research group. So, we're trying as much as possible to have initiatives in which we're working with partners from industry, but also from academics to try and find low carbon materials and explore, new structural systems that could potentially help us to reduce embodied carbon as much as possible.
Yeah, so with that, we'll just kind of maybe talk about one of the trends that we're seeing and a kind of effort that's going on to process the internal data that we have. So here's one example: is carbon per area over the building height, and kind of judging off the CLF study from a couple of years ago. That's the green line. And then noting from a study last year that we did of a couple of years ago of selected projects at SOM, the red line, and then looking at what should our targets be over time as SOM is trying to get to zero. And I think what we're seeing is, and it's probably a common theme along the firms here, is along different heights, and that could be expanded to different areas, different hazards, different programs. There's a lot of different solutions. So for this height example, at a smaller scale building, we do have more opportunities to use low carbon materials like timber, and from a code perspective, a lot easier to get into construction. As we move to taller buildings, we see there's smaller decisions that we can make, but there's, from a variety of constraints, there's only certain decisions we can make, and our reductions are maybe not as huge as we would like. And then as you move to very tall buildings, again, those constraints become even tougher, and we can make decisions on form to reduce wind loads, and we see a strong impact there. But we don't see that we have a solution yet to get to zero for a really tall building. And so our hope is that, from the data we've collected over the past, I guess, probably 10 years or so, from these projects, trying to be able to calculate based on the year that you're designing your project, right? The type of project it is, that an engineer can easily get a kind of estimated number of a target where they should be. So factoring in height, seismicity, location, program, not a final number, but at least then a gauge of where they should be. And noting that certain projects have a good opportunity for reduction. And again, we see those as maybe the smaller, shorter structures for now, but also realizing that a lot of the floor area that we build comes from these tall projects. That projects may not be as common, but they have so much floor area in them that a lot of the floor area we're building is in these taller projects. And so we can make reductions for this small project, but if it's a smaller amount of floor area, we need to focus our efforts on some of the bigger ones. So an ongoing effort that we see, and we're looking forward to using this data and combined with the collected SE2050 data to be able to make some of these decisions and help educate engineers over time. So thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Teresa at WSP.
Hi, I'm here. I thought I lost Zoom for a moment. So I'm with WSP, and we have been playing around in looking at future ready, at sustainability at SE2050 for quite a few years. And we have just recently, in the fall, written our commitment letter to the SE2050 program. Like other firms mentioned, we had to talk about it quite a lot and look at what our business was doing already. And we felt that we could really offer a lot to the SE2050 program. And that was really the wanting to bring this SE2050 beyond buildings into the infrastructure was the tipping point that brought WSP into the SE2050 commitment, which I'm very excited about. WSP is a worldwide company, and our cousins in the UK have been doing an awful lot of things in the SE2050 world in embodied carbon that it sort of felt like there was all these different entities of WSP that was doing something. So the very first thing that we felt we needed to do when we joined the SE2050 commitment was just to look within our own company and see what was going on, what was happening, what we could use here in the United States, what makes sense to the business lines that are here in our country, and just leverage the information and products that were already being done. One of the things that I'm constantly amazed with is in the UK, they have some very aggressive embodied carbon goals. And one of the first things that the UK offices did was go through their entire inventory of projects over the past 1 or 2 years and measure the embodied carbon in all of those projects, because they wanted that as the benchmark for going forward, that say this is our baseline. They essentially created their own baseline so that they can measure against their own work, which I think is great. Here in the US, we have 2 business lines, and I have a timeline I was going to share. Essentially, we have, I think you guys can see this. You see, we have 2 chairs. We have transportation facilities, which is myself, and we have Sarah Buffalo in the properties and buildings. So properties and buildings have been doing embodied carbon for a number of years, and we're going to leverage their work for this first year while we build. Essentially, we're kind of doing 2 things at the same time. We're building our embodied carbon action plan for this year. We're planning the embodied carbon action plan for next year at the same time. We need to calculate how we're going to develop our team to roll out the embodied carbon commitment throughout the United States. And I have another. This is a draft of ideas. We are going to take an idea from our UK office where they have embodied carbon champions throughout the company. We've elected to have embodied carbon champions for buildings and for roads and bridges. We realize that there is a lot of education that has to be done, and that is one of the big pieces that we need to address this year, is educating the structural engineers and then beginning to advocate out into our community, into our clients. The interesting thing, looking across the United States, here in Boston, I sit in the Boston office, and here in the Boston office, we have taken a project for the MBTA, the subway system here in Boston, to 100%. And then the client added doing embodied carbon onto the structure. So on one hand, you're like, oh, why didn't we start with this? But on the other hand, this is a humongous, this is so huge that they have added this onto our project to measure embodied carbon. We figure that this is the very first project to do that. That is a huge step forward. And I mention that because there are so many clients that are now, you know, we were talking about advocating to the clients. The clients are coming back to us and asking us, how do we go about doing this? Is it a big deal? Can we use it here? How can we incorporate this into the scope of work for the project? It's a very exciting time to be looking across the scenery at what's happening in our country. Now, regarding bridges and roads, I had made suggestions to WSP that we have a slightly lower mark on that, on the infrastructure. Start with the substations that are buildings that are just simply unoccupied. Start with parking garages and work your way up. And the leadership said, no, we want to see how we can do this for bridges. So we're starting with an evaluation of the information that we have in-house, looking at our plan, and it looks like at this moment, if you ask me today, it looks like we're going to have one system to do buildings and a completely separate system to do bridges and roads. How we get it done, that's where the fun is, right? So we are moving along this path, and I'm very excited about this. And we will have actual real life slides next time you invite me. But right now we are in the thick of determining how we're going to go about doing our advocacy, who we're going to talk to, how we're going to go about branching that out, our education, setting up our champions in our offices, and starting the embodied carbon process. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mohammed, and he's going to bring us to the next part of, how do I do this? Stop share. Thank you.
Okay, great. I think with these great presentations and the introduction to each company's activities, we already respond to half of our question. And we have half an hour left, but I'm pretty excited. I'm sure we are all really excited about this initiative, and I want to get into the questions right away and start with that WSP actually, to just take it from, you mentioned a couple of really good points on the impact of making these commitments to the company, and what are the other potential impacts that you see between like committing to SE2050 and other initiatives that are happening, other targets related to operational carbon and embodied carbons that are coming from different sectors or different part of our industry?
Well, we feel that we can make an industry-wide impact by leading and stepping forward and providing these embodied carbon, and going beyond that and doing the whole building analysis for our various projects and bringing the clients in. Is that what the question is?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, after that, I think we can take it to SOM. SOM is another multidisciplinary company that you guys have different disciplines like similar to WSP and TT and others. So what is the potential impacts of committing to SE2050 on your work and collaboration and the process of your work?
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think if the question is kind of, you know, how does it affect our work and our ability to kind of get jobs and advocate to clients, you know, I think one big thing is our ability to kind of publicize this commitment to SE2050 and put it forward as a true design driver to clients, speaks volumes to clients who have sustainability at the forefront of their project's objectives. I think it becomes a bit of a challenge in some instances if we run into a client who that's not really a high priority for them. And that's part of, I think, where our advocacy comes into play and our ability to express to them that these commitments actually can save them money at the end of the day, because one of the biggest things we can do as designers to reduce embodied carbon is to reduce quantities. So by kind of being able to present that to the clients and show that it actually can be beneficial from a cost standpoint, but also from a scheduling standpoint, that is a big way we can get our foot in the door and start to get more of the clients on our side and drive this initiative forward.
That was a really good point, that in many cases SE2050 resonate with the client goal, so it makes it easier. It helps for the marketing strategy, but there are some cases that there is a need for advocacy because it may not be totally aligned with what the clients need. So we can move to the MKA team. What is the impact of these on your perhaps clients and the process of the work that you have, and what you have experienced so far with SE2050 applying to your jobs?
Sure. So kind of picking up, we agree a lot with what Matthew highlighted there. I think there are a lot of clients who are very interested in this, and they're always happy to see that we're sort of doing our part. There's a lot of segments of our industry that all have their own initiatives, and this is the one for structural engineering. And it's a great space for us because, like we were talking about, we know the quantities, and it's a great place for us to lead. And as far as maybe negative impacts or perceived negative impacts, I think there's a lot of hesitation sometimes when people maybe think about joining SE2050, or they think about putting together embodied carbon numbers, because they see it as time, right? You look at that and you say, oh man, I've never done this before. I don't know how long this will take. We already have 800 obligations. How's this going to work? My fees aren't going up. It's not in my scope. These are things that we're probably all very familiar with. But I guess from our standpoint at MKA, what we really like to highlight is the quantities are in our scope. And I guess I just want to take a little bit of the spook factor out of it. And that's what we try to do with the folks who've never done it before. It's kind of like there's not too much to be afraid of. There's so many organizations and resources and ways to take the quantities that you have and arrive at a carbon number. And so I think there is a perceived negative impact that, joining SE2050 might be hard, or coming up with embodied carbon numbers might be hard. But if you have your quantities, which we all would like to in a perfect world, then you can, I think maybe easier than you might think, arrive at these conclusions. And all of a sudden you'll find yourself working right alongside everybody who's been doing this, for just as long. It's pretty simple in that regard. And it's exciting that we can all kind of get together on it in that way.
I think this is a perfect question. I think for talking about the barriers and opportunities that come with SE2050 for the individual companies. So before we move on to the question 2, and that Alex is going to ask, is I just want to make sure if anyone else on the panel want to chime in and add anything to the barrier that Team Teresa and Matthew mentioned, because this is pretty important to know that sometimes there's a huge advantage, but sometimes there are like challenges, not necessarily barriers, but there are some challenges to overcome when it comes to the impact of SE2050 for the individual firms. Teresa, go ahead.
So one of the things that we come in contact, see as a barrier, or we don't use the word barrier so much as roadblock, is the client may have certain standards, certain specifications, certain ways of doing things that they've done for the past 50 years. And their entire organization is used to doing it that way. So to address that takes a certain amount of time. And we've seen change in clients, but you have to be patient with them as far as that goes. And you have to show them ways to work with expanding the knowledge within their own organization to bring them along. You're educating their organization as well as your own organization in what we're talking about and what changes need to be made in order to prepare them for a really successful project.
Yeah, great point.
To speak on that, if I could just jump in for a second.
Sure.
At MKA, later this week, we're one of our client has asked us to present an 8-hour seminar to teach them about sustainability and what that looks like in the structural engineering world. So it's pretty encouraging to see that there is a desire for education out there. Owners and clients do want to integrate this onto their projects.
No, all great point. I mean, just like before we move on to Alex, I mean, it's I mean, as a sustainability consultant, I think it's really important to see these commitment in a big picture, because that's always one of the ways of making sure that when clients and like owners and corporates see this commitment in the big picture in synergy with other sustainability initiatives, it makes it much easier to achieve. So, Alex, go ahead.
Sure, and thanks, Mohammed. I guess so many of the firms that are speaking today have had really developed programs, or at least have been involved in this embodied carbon tracking for quite some time. But we know that, what Mike Gryniuk said at the beginning, we have 71 companies signed on to SE2050, and a lot of those are within the last year. TT or KPFF, could you give us some, advice or first steps that you would recommend to any company that's just starting? What you found was most important? What, was it finding one champion? Was it finding a whole group of people to implement this in the projects? What worked best for you, or what didn't work?
I can start off. It's pretty much a pyramid scheme that we try to go for. So by that, I mean, you need a small number of very dedicated people to start. It doesn't have to be 100 engineers, but if you can get 5 people in a bunch of different offices that get really engaged, set out to learn these things, learn whatever the industry has learned. And then if each of them can get 2 or 3 people involved, it becomes a pretty wide net pretty quickly. And one of the things that I found most encouraging is there is really a big appetite, at least at TT, and I would say probably at all of our companies, especially younger engineers. This is not a big lift to get people interested. So if you can get a few knowledgeable people, it's not hard to then say, okay, who wants to come learn about this? And you get 20 people in that room, not 1 or 2 more. So I think a small core of dedicated people who go out and try to build knowledge for a little while, it can grow really quickly from there.
And with that, I guess I'm curious, what portion of your structural engineers, or how fast did it take for people, right now in my office, every structural engineer knows how to use Revit. Do they all know how to use these reporting systems and this data analysis, the different apps? Yeah. Or is this someone that you kind of assign to be, here's my project, can you do this work for me?
Our end goal is to make it regular practice for every engineer. That is not the case yet. It does take time. So we're going from I would say we're going from the 20 people to the 50 people type range right now. But we want to get quickly from there to pretty much every structural engineer is able to do this. They may not be an expert in it, but they can do a takeoff on the typical bay they're designing, and then maybe try a slightly different way of framing and do another takeoff. That's, Michael mentioned that one of our goals in 2022 is education. We're trying to do exactly that. Take the core and build it out to base knowledge for everybody.
And I'll add to what you said, Patrick. It seems to be that it quite often it's the younger engineers. And I think there's a couple of reasons why. I mean, just a bunch of kids who are fired up, which is great. But it also used to be that, us old guys remember that even 5 or 10 years ago, there wasn't that much that as structural engineers we could do. We'd go to the sustainability charrette and kind of sit there and just talk about fly ash and overall structural quantities. The landscape has changed a little bit now that there's a lot of different, not only tracking resources, but a lot of different technologies that we can use and speak to. At KPFF, we don't have just one in-house expert. We of course have our SE2050 champions. And we have a few people, Shana is one of them, who is kind of a leader in sustainability for our office, but we have regional offices across the country. And so we try to learn from the successes of other offices and apply it to our region. One example of that is Shana in the Seattle office has been running LCA analysis for her jobs, sometimes even beyond the structural portions of the jobs. They've taken on some of the architectural quantities as well, but she's been able to help other regional offices do that. And like you said, Patrick, you get one person who's involved and you start to educate other ones. I think it's a great way for us to get our hands dirty on the sustainability counting and involved in the carbon. We also, like I mentioned, have that Teams page, and it's not complicated, but it's a really great quick question resource that you can get an answer back quickly, and acts as a nice way for us to catalog things like template specs and past presentations.
Yeah, that's a really great suggestion for those starting out, or how to communicate within an office, especially in this remote setting. And I guess you had mentioned looking at specs, looking at that type of integrating some of these ideas into projects. Do you I guess TT, you mentioned in the DC office that you're working with manufacturers, or looking at products and trying to move the arrow towards being more or have less embodied carbon. Do you have any barriers or lessons learned in working with those types of people on projects?
I can address that one. In the DC office, we've seen a real engagement from the subcontractor community. DC is a concrete town, and you sort of have this impression that maybe when you go and talk to some of the contractors or some of the suppliers, you might get pushback, and there is some of that, to some extent. But for the most part, there's just this really engagement, a real genuine engagement to try to find solutions. What I've noticed, and I think what we're all seeing, is there's a business side to this. There's the do the right thing side, but there's the business side. And one of the products that is sweeping the nation and captures a lot of headlines, of course, is Carbon Cure. Carbon Cure, isn't going to solve the problem on its own, but it's a nice template to say a lot of our concrete subcontractors in the DC market adopted Carbon Cure before it was like a thing, because it was more profitable for them to do so, because they were buying less cement, and the cost that they paid to Carbon Cure was less than the cement that they would have bought. So it's one of those great stories on a sort of a smaller scale to say this is what can be accomplished, and we're seeing people jumping at that, which is really exciting.
I'll also add from a materials discussion that, like Tim and Catherine highlighted, there's not one material that's going to solve this. There isn't, unfortunately, a silver bullet that we're all looking for. We have to make sure that we use the right material as the right solution in the appropriate space to achieve the best space for the owner and user at the end. What we can do is, for each material, improve that embodied carbon. Sometimes it doesn't even have much of a cost. I was talking to a colleague in Louisville, and they wanted to specify 56 day strengths for their concrete instead of 28. Well, the issue with that isn't really a cost issue. It's just the subcontractor knowing that they should keep a couple of extra cylinders around to do those breaks so they can build up that data. So again, like you mentioned, talking to the subs is really important, and really a great way to get some headway and make some change.
Thank you. Those are great points. And then I guess tacking onto that, in terms of, have any of your firms seen or have made, where you're looking at, different smaller levers, but, I know someone mentioned about the structural system as a whole. Has anyone, made larger decisions of the entire structural system based on trying to reduce embodied carbon? Or is the stage that we're at right now, okay, we will do a concrete building and let's see how we can reduce it from there? Does anyone has anyone experienced that either way?
I can chime in on that. I would say not a lot of projects are at the stage where they're selecting systems or say grids based on embodied carbon. I've started to see some early discussions, particularly if a client is exploring mass timber early. A lot of times that is for embodied carbon reasons or the publicity of reducing embodied carbon, which is fine. We can do that. I would say the stage we're at is, but we are not restricted to only say the concrete mix or designing one beam. I'd say at our firm, we're sort of at the level of framing systems. So we're not going to change grids, but we do on several projects look at what is the best way to frame this floor with what combination of materials and depths and things like that. Lightweight, normal weight, these things, investigating, like say the floor framing as a system to optimize for embodied carbon. We are starting to do that. That also requires either an architect or a client who has some sort of interest in exploring this, maybe just as a lead credit, but yeah.
I think too, the interesting, trying to experiment with new materials. If there's a new cement that a concrete supplier wants to use, we don't exactly know how it will perform. We as structural engineers may be able to help get it into the project, go through the right code approvals, get the test break data. But is it going to shrink more? Is it going to have more cracks in it? Is it going to be durable? Can it be polished? Again, working with the architects and ultimately the client and making sure we can put that in the right location. Maybe it's just a slab on grade that we're experimenting with in the back. And then also we're really zeroing in on any potential cost risk for that material. If that cement actually gets to be quite a bit more expensive, we're not doing it in a giant area. So again, we can kind of play an experiment, try it out in a small responsible area with low architectural risk, low structural risk, but at least then have a data point to look back on.
I just want to tack onto that quickly because I think it's really important. And there was a question in the chat about getting concrete to zero. So yes, we can do a lot of things in the mixes. We can do better, more efficient design, but that's reducing 50% or 60%. It's not 100%. So there's no question that to achieve 2050, there's going to be material changes or at least changes in the way we produce materials. And what Janet's talking about is a big part of what structural engineers need to do is, or are going to need to do, is help usher in these new technologies by supporting them and experimenting with them or talking to these suppliers, like modifying our specifications to allow them. That's going to be a big part of the puzzle, especially, after say the next 10 years when some of these startups that I'm sure many of us are hearing about with different cement materials and things like that become viable. We really need to practice ushering in new technologies.
Yeah, if I could add to that, I think that's what's exciting about SE2050, all the firms joining, and even CLF being involved is the demand from the industry will kind of foster this innovation and bring us to, like what Patrick's saying, is a reduction from the manufacturers who can make some of these big changes. And I think what we don't want to see is the structural engineer updates their spec and then the contractor says, hey, no one else does that, we're not going to do that. We want to see, they say, oh yeah, everyone's doing that. And then they kind of have to, and the same thing from the client, that the client learns or the architects know that this is the standard and can't just say, oh, no one's doing that. So we think as an overall group, we're going to be able to make this big change happen.
Oh, thank you so much for all of your answers. Those are really, really interesting. I do want to address one of the questions in the chat box about local jurisdictions. How accommodating are they to, in this case, they're asking about mass timber, but if anyone has any comments in general about, local jurisdictions, how maybe this will, how the code might follow or precede some of our design choices. And, it's also love to hear from a few different people. I know we have people all over the country and it probably varies quite widely.
I can jump in and speak for the New York City Building Code a little bit. They tend to lag behind IBC quite a bit. We just got the the recognition of CLT as part of the type 4 construction for mass timber. Yeah, I think in the question, yeah, the IBC 2015 is when they first brought in the CLT as mass timber. So that's been a challenge, right? Because there's some serious height restrictions on the application of timber for a primary structural material there. So we're trying to find workarounds. And I think based on some of the conversations we've had in the firm, a lot of it's based on perception. You know, early on when CLT came out, there's a lot of concerns about delamination. So trying to, you know, take away any of that fear factor around these new materials and push forward performance-based designs as much as we can to prove to whoever it might be that has, you know, reservations about these materials at certain scales to show them that they really can perform in these larger applications, so that we can start to, you know, increase the amount of timber, reduce the amount of concrete, if that's the direction, you know, a design team wants to push forward. I think is going to be a big part of what's going on with this group is, you know, collectively, if we can start to influence these AHJs, would, you know, help to push everything forward. But I know New York is not the biggest timber town, so definitely want to hear from other areas.
Yeah, do any of our friends in Seattle have any input? I know Seattle's been ahead of the game for quite a while.
Sure, I'll jump in here. Yeah, I guess we're sort of tracking that closely. A lot of the timber buildings that we build are very similar and repeatable. We have a few that are sort of in design that are a little bit more ambitious and sprawling, but we haven't gone for a lot of height. I think that's probably something interesting to watch. You know, it's cool to see what TT is doing in my native Milwaukee, Wisconsin with the Ascent Tower. I think that's a wonderful project. You know, what does it look like when we go 12 stories with timber? And I think that's an example of what happens if we push the next 20% of this material limit. And I think we should be trying to do that with all our materials. What happens in this next 20%? As far as the jurisdictions catching up, I unfortunately don't have a really solid answer to that. But I think this group and SE2050 and SE structural engineers moving together to try to move the needle has a lot of push. And kind of like what Chris was alluding to, if we're all doing it, the industry comes with, you know, and jurisdictions are going to have to go along with it too. So there's a little bit of tug and pull there, but I think if we propose ambitious things, something will stick. So we want to keep that ambition up.
And Tim, to tack on to your point, you know, as structural engineers, there's a lot we can do, a lot we can advocate for, but we need the help of our clients, architects, developers. If it's a design build project, if it's a government project, I mean, we're looking for, you know, the whole team to bring that energy and that drive toward the same goal. And then the AHJs can, you know, they rule their kingdom, but you know, for certain projects, they bend the rules, they adopt new ways of thinking. I mean, they want to be progressive too. It's just harder for them to do so. So if the whole team is pulling in that same direction, it helps.
I would also say, you know, from the concrete's perspective, which concrete, right, is a material that we're trying to get a lot of reductions on. The concrete code does allow us to use alternative aggregates and alternative cements, but it has requirements about sort of testing and that kind of thing. And so I think what we've found with that is really taking the building official along on our journey of like, this is how we looked at it. This is the data that we looked at to make ourselves feel comfortable with how it, you know, how we think it's going to perform, and we're going to use it in these sort of test cases so that they also have that amount of comfort. So I think it's taking them on that journey can also help make them have that comfort.
Could I also just add a point? Because I just, before we run out of time, I really want to just say, think about what's happening right now. We have some of the best structural engineering firms in the country having a collective discussion, sharing information on what they're doing for embodied carbon. Okay, that would have been unheard of several years ago. And that's not necessarily because of SE2050. That's just because, you know, there have been decisions that they have made personally and professionally to push this forward. And I just want to make the point, if there are architects or owners on the call, I can't stress enough what was just mentioned about needing your support, your advocacy. I can tell you without hesitation that most of the successes are only because either the architect or primarily the owner was on board from day one. And if they weren't on board from day one, we got them on board, okay, through the education, the advocacy process. And I can say without hesitation that a lot of the structural engineers on this call have spent their own personal time working on this, okay? And so we do need some help from the greater building industry. There are no shortage of tools here, okay? These firms are doing amazing things, okay? But we've got to engage the structural engineers early on in the conversation, okay? We are the ones iterating on these designs. We know the specifications. We don't necessarily want to be told what to do to our spec. We want to own that and control that a little bit. So I just wanted to make that that point, and we have to respond to our clients who are asking us this question. So it behooves everyone to be as educated as possible on this topic, so that we can talk intelligently about it. And sometimes I feel, maybe I'd be curious what others think. The more we talk about reductions in concrete, all of a sudden, the harder the challenge seems to be. And so we've got to find ways to really sort of streamline some of those discussions and have it early. So I just want to say congratulations to everyone on the call who presented today. I think I'm pretty pumped up. So that was it.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, Michael, that was a great chime in, and it's I think we have a lot of question, but maybe like David and Alex, maybe we can just kind of like use the 1 minute or 2 minutes that we have to see how this advocacy and education within the industry, and just like in collaboration with the other disciplines that we work with, like MEP 2040 is just out, like AIA 2030, been advocating for this for a long time now. What are the other strategies that we can implement to make sure that these succeed and like we make a progress?
Yeah, I was going to say for myself, I'm also the chair of AIA Chicago Committee on the Environment, and I see another opportunity in the future, a future presentation to AIA Chicago. I don't see why not. And then there was another caller that was on the phone who is I was involved with National AIA Committee on the Environment, and also California AIA Committee on the Environment. So the more people, more architects, that become engaged with the engineers, and we can become your advocates. Absolutely. And I was just going to say, I totally agree with what you're saying, Mike, about early engagement. I think that is so key between the architect and the engineer and the owner, that will help, get the strategies on the project, but also I think reduce potential cost if that engagement happens later. It will be more difficult, and then theoretically more expensive to do so. So the sooner we can collaborate, the better on every single project. Mohammed, anything else to add, or Alex?
No, I think we can close it on time. We had a fantastic panel. I mean, thank you all. Thank you, David, for organizing this. This was a fantastic panel. Like, I mean, as Michael mentioned, this conversation would have not happened like 5 years ago. And I hope we can have more events like these that can help this momentum to even get faster in making progress. So thank you all for joining. Just a closing brief. We're gonna have the recording. You can watch the recordings of the past CLF Chicago sessions, and also I encourage you to watch similar sessions held by CLF DC and other chapters on SE2050. There are fantastic contents out there to watch and learn more about what's happening in different markets and different topics. So with that, thank you all for joining, and see you all in the next event.